if you read about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, there's a pretty strong evidence about how early childhood stuff impacts our substance use. And if the loss of our parents and the incarceration and overdoses and all of these things impact the kids, imagine the kids coming up under this addiction crisis. So I think the next wave is bigger. So we need to move now. Like as a country, we need to mobilize in a major way to bring some hope to our communities and get on top of this thing, or the next wave is going to be bigger.
Well, and that is a realistic way to look at it, right? Like the more we don't run to give these people help, the ones who want it, the more likely it is they're going to die. That's just that sucks, but it's the reality. I mean, you get people dying from fentanyl all the time, and it sucks to say it, but it's all the time. You know, I got a buddy who just got sober off of that stuff, and he knows if he goes back out, he knows it's likely that he dies. I mean, this is back, I'm a tenant of the rooms, right? And, the big book said, go out and try more drinking. We're not living in that world anymore in certain aspects of this fight. And we've got to just give people all the hope and support we can.
Yeah, I agree. And, so I think we gotta mobilize, and we gotta do it now. I mean, I think the pandemic that just happened told us, how much people are in pain. When you look at suicide rates going up and overdoses and alcohol consumption, I was just reading an article about even people for getting on the list for liver transplants are like higher now because of the way that drinking was during the pandemic. Like it is, we are sort of at the peak of this, and we need to move quickly or it will cycle up again.
Yeah.
And that's why Phoenix is, we grew at an exponential rate. Like most people would say, don't grow your nonprofit, from 7 communities to 60 communities in like 2 years. But we had to try, right? Like we have to try, because we need to throw everything at this that we can. And if Phoenix can help anybody, let's get it to more cities. Yeah,
I mean, not that this is a fair comparison, but you've never told like EMS to not set up in certain corners of America. Let's get out there. Let's see how we can have the impact. All right, Scott, I'm going to let you go. But anything else before any other gems you want to drop on us? Because this has been inspiring for me, and I feel very good right now. So hopefully, like you said, it'll be a slow burn. And I'll be able to share this.
I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing about the Phoenix. And if people want to learn more, they can just go to thephoenix.org. And if there's somebody who wants to support it coming to the town, they can make a donation there too.
All right. Thephoenix.org. It is a free, sober, active community that helps people rise, recover, and live through the power of fitness. It's the real deal. It's 50 cities all over the country. It's locations people can get involved, man. So
just show up, and 48 hours sober is the only place of admission.
All right, man. Scott, I cannot thank you enough. This will be up tomorrow, so I'll shoot you a link via text. Dude, thanks for sharing the message.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for what you do. I really appreciate that you're out there.
Yeah, thank you, man. I'll hopefully see you down the road, man. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right, see you, Scott. Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at RogueMediaNetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.
Start your countdown to the most delicious Sunday of the year at Whole Foods Market. The Easter in Bloom event is on. Experience it in stores from March 29th through April 11th with irresistible deals and delights store-wide. Save on feast-worthy animal welfare certified meats like spiral cut ham and boneless ribeye. Then add a flash of green to the scene with savings on organic asparagus. Too busy to cook? Don't sleep on their crowd favorite catering. Find all of that plus Source for Good floral bouquets and more at your local Whole Foods Market.
Laura Redmond is a lot of things, but the two most important for me is she's sober, so she ends up on this podcast, and she is a force of nature. During a point in this podcast, I literally asked her how much I was going to owe her after this hour, because it was like therapy for me, and I hope it will be a real safe place for you to just hear about her recovery. She was a life coach, or excuse me, a fitness coach to the stars. We're talking about Tom Cruise. We're talking about Mary Tyler Moore. We're talking about Madonna. She was huge in the 80s as far as the fitness revolution was concerned, and she is huge now as far as helping people as a coach, whether you want to call it a life coach or a confidence coach. She's the real deal. She has a book, Feel Good Naked, that she wrote a while ago, and I'm honored to write another one. Of course, her website, lauraredmond.com. We're going to link it to the pod. And this is fantastic. I'm really stoked that she took the time to hang out with me for an hour, because I just got done and I feel real good. Only one way to feel better, right? Kevin Souza. Coke Zero, by the way. You there?
There we go.
There we go.
Hi.
Hey, wow, you sound great.
You sound great too. So my audio is coming through?
Yeah, it's coming through really well.
Nice.
I'm in a studio right now in Central Texas, and our producer is Aaron and Allison too. We have two people today. I mean, that's how big of a podcast this is.
That's pretty nice. That's wonderful to have backup. I love it.
Yeah, I could use some backup today, but you're stuck with me solo. Are you in Portland?
I'm in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I love it out here, and I've been here for over 20 years now. What about you with Texas?
I've been in Texas for 4 years. I live in Austin now. I'm working out of Waco, and it's awesome. I never thought, I'm from Philadelphia. I never thought that I would love it as much as I do, but I like Texas. It's all right.
Did you go from Philly to Texas?
I've been all over. I grew up in Philly. I went to school in Virginia, lived in the Northeast and some cities there, and then found my way to, I guess, fell into rehab and then kind of got restarted, and have been moving and grooving ever since.
Yay, that's so awesome.
You've been sober for, I guess, we have a mutual friend in Jill, and
yes.
You've been sober around 4 years, she tells me?
2017, August 22nd.
Okay, August 22nd, 2017. But you were, for the better portion of your life, you were uplifting people physically, emotionally, and mentally.
Yes. And that was probably the greatest shame piece for me, was being conscious of what my work was and then what my private life included with alcohol. So there was a really powerful connection that I made once I stopped drinking around the fact that shame is part of life, and if you can learn to live and understand shame, you have a doorway out. And so it was a very strong connection for me to recognize the struggle I was in with no one's awareness at all that was my exact struggle. I hit it well.
Yeah, you have, obviously, because you had a lot of success. Before I get into you and your backstory, when you say understanding shame, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that shame is when you feel bad about who you are. And my alcoholism was hidden because I was terrified to face what other people would think of me in that paradigm of alcoholism. It gave me great pain to imagine people seeing me as an alcoholic, because it would make me less likable. The shame was my own hatred towards self around imagining how others would perceive me. So it's a big topic, shame, and I think it has many layers, but I'm most comfortable now talking about all those layers. And honestly, I think it's mostly about feeling bad about who you are and then imagining if others saw you the same way.
And how do you take that and flip it and almost make it empowering?
Because we're all humans doing this human incarnation, and shame is part of that. And I've learned to welcome all of the feelings, all of the emotions. And shame gets to have a seat at my table when she needs my love. And when I give love to a shameful feeling or thought, it immediately gives me self-compassion. And then I'm in a better situation to help others as well as myself. So it's turning it from a hatred paradigm to a loving paradigm. And that's been one of the greatest, most liberating, freeing aspects of my healing.
Yeah, it's just taking it easy on yourself and then learning through your journey how to understanding those emotions for me has been huge. And I forget, that's why I got to practice it daily because I will, I've heard people say if I had a friend that talked to me the way I've been talking to myself, they wouldn't be my friend. And sometimes I get going on the shame and it's like, wait, what are we doing here? And then if I can employ what you just said and show love to myself, right? Like I'm supposed to somebody else, the freedom starts.
And I want to go back to something I just heard you say about, oh, whoa, why am I in this moment? What my language would be more like, oh, come here, precious, sweet shame. What is it that's happening? What are you feeling right now? Tell me more. What's going on? Are you in present time, or are you having a memory, or are you projecting? Like, I sit with language that is supportive and loving, because even I find with my high sensitivity, even if I say, wait, why are you here? That already sets me up to feel embarrassed or guilty about it. But if I say, come here, sweetie, and I'll put both my hands on my heart, which is a physical, somatic way to hold myself just lovingly in this experience of the feeling, that has served me so beautifully, because the language we speak to ourselves is usually, often, the most critical, mean, non-supportive language. So I will catch myself on the smallest little ways of not being supportive to self, but being critical, judgmental, or unkind. And that means every word matters.
Wow, Laura, how much am I going to owe you after this? This is pretty good. This is really good stuff. I want to start back with you. When did you, because I want to get into your journey and your sobriety. When did you have your first drink, or when do you remember alcohol really having a positive effect? But that's what happened with me, right? When did you feel like, oh gosh, where has this been?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and if you've ever been there, you understand that it's a very, very big drinking culture.
Yeah.
The party is 24/7, and it's not about when you drink, it's that you drink all the time. There's a joke in New Orleans that there's alcohol in a baby bottle because it calms the baby down, like Dramamine. So I grew up in a culture that was just, alcohol was part of living every day. And I was surrounded by it without any idea that it was odd or different or something that actually was not a great substance or a behavioral alteration. And so my first time I could feel the effects of ethanol in my body would have been around the age of 12. And what I remember was it gave me such relief. I felt like I could just exist with no worries, no stress, no problems. I can see myself sitting in this bar in the French Quarter with my older sister and her boyfriend, and they had kind of snuck me in because in New Orleans it's really easy to get into any bar, no matter your age. And they gave me a sip of the frozen daiquiri. And I think that was one of those moments where I left my brain and body, and it was so elating. It just felt like the first time I probably had felt relief in my life, and I loved it.
What was your home life like? Your family, you mentioned for the first time feeling relief. So what was it like at home?
Lots of trauma. My beloved mother was married to my father, and they were young, and they were big drinkers. And he left our home when I was 8, and she started to get really ill when I was 12, and she died when I was just 16. And so I was sort of one of these children that didn't have any direction emotionally, no base for those feelings that we just mentioned that aren't so pleasant. Everything was a party. Everything was a celebration. There was no place to land if you were struggling or having issues. And I grew up with 2 older sisters. And my understanding now of who I am is a highly sensitive child, a highly sensitive adult. Highly sensitive people really need the support to go through emotions, and I had none of that. So between my father leaving and my mother getting ill for 5 years before dying, it was a very traumatic time. And I had an abusive stepfather who my mother married, and I was the only one that he abused, and it was mentally abusive. It was not physical abuse, but it was deep mental abuse in my developmental years. So I was surrounded by trauma, and alcohol was the only place I knew that I could just escape that trauma for however long the effect lasted in my brain. So that would be why I know now that childhood just promoted this whole alcoholism that developed very slowly.
I've seen some of your work before, as you were coming up, and recently, on TV in Portland, and you've got a magnetic persona. When you were a kid, were people looking at you? Would they say, "Hey, Laura's a lot of fun. She's happy," or would they, or did you come off as somebody who was dealing with trauma?
Such a good question, Pete. I knew how to make all the adults happy. And so you could call it the ultimate codependency. So if I was a performatory, extroverted, joyful human, everybody was pleased. So I really knew that was one of my superpowers, was to be there for others in a way that was joyful and happy and dynamic. But truly, I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert extrovert. So I knew how to make other people happy. And that was how I became so aware in the sensitivity I described with what to do to make the situation better. And I know it was really a doorway into being of service to others in a much more meaningful way. But it was also a departure from my needs to make another person happy, and to be the positive, the optimist, the entertainer, the performer. And so I started young, and I loved what it did to people when I was that personality of joy and optimism. But I was denying all that introverted complexity that was in the emotional realm.
What kind of person did you identify? What kind of person were you as far as being a young adult? Were you into acting? Were you into sports? Obviously, you were into fitness, but how did you identify?
Well, the fitness came from watching my mother lose her ability to walk. At the end of her life, she was paralyzed by the radiation that they used for her cancer. And I was a very chubby child. I was a child that was always told she was ugly up against my female counterparts that were very classically beautiful. I had more of the Irish genes with the freckles, the red hair, the chubby body. And once my mother's legs didn't work, I realized I had 2 legs that did work. And that meant that I needed to use them. So I just very slowly started to jog. And this would have been 1978 when jogging was very new in the culture.
Yeah.
And I was in a boarding school with a roommate that jogged. So what happened when I started jogging, even though it was a quarter of a mile at most, was I noticed my brain felt better. It was the dopamine effect, but I didn't understand it really. I just knew, oh, I actually feel much more up than I felt when I started. And then I just became really pulled to this idea of running. So I became a runner with this feeling of my body changing, my brain chemistry changing. And then when I arrived at Chapel Hill, where I went to school, I came upon an exercise studio. This was, again, 1980, so this was not something that we saw much of in the culture yet. It was the Jane Fonda just starting kind of movement.
Yeah.
And I put myself in a class. Lawrence Taylor was to my right, and I was like, you know what? I really like this. There's music, and I'm a dancer, and I felt my dance come through in that very moment. And it just was like, oh, this is my fit. And I just started doing this class at the studio off campus. And the owner finally said, I want you to work here. You are so incredible. I can't believe it. So I started working in fitness while getting my degree, and then created an entire career out of it in New York City.
A couple of things on what you just said. One, I don't know if it's the addict gene. I experienced the same exact thing you did at maybe a couple years older. I was a football player who couldn't play football because of health stuff. And I was big. And my brother Michael had gone to California. He had the same build, and he'd lost weight just running and lifting. So the summer going into my senior year in college, I literally jogged a quarter mile around the block. And I felt better. Like I was like, wow, I feel good. And that summer I got up to 3-4 miles a day, and I was addicted to how it made me feel. I liked the way it was making me look, and I was off. And I've been running ever since, and mixed in with lifting. People will probably say I could lift more than I run, because I like running so much. I do it so often. But same exact experience now. Do you attribute that a little bit to the addict gene? That I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if you call it endorphins or what, but that rush felt so good. I became hooked on it.
Oh, I love knowing that about you and my sharing that. That feels so helpful to hear, because that dopamine is what it is. It's like when you move your body, you get the dopamine that is what feels so good in the brain, while the body, as you say, is really becoming much more embodied, which means just more aligned with the form it's meant to be.
And by the time,
it's a win-win.
Yeah, it is a win-win. And by the time I was a senior in college, I was a pro at drinking, and that running could help me, would reset for me. It was almost as good as doing like speed, not quite, but like it would reset my brain, and I would be ready to go for the rest of the day and somehow feel clean. What was LT like?
Oh, LT. My memory of LT to this day is doing a squat next to him, pardon me, and his thighs. So his thighs were big, and he would wear these shorts to class that were short. And when you think of the quadricep, it's a quadricep because it's 4 parts. But when this man went into a squat, his 4-part quadricep would quiver and shake, and he would hold the squat like, super intense. And I would turn my head and go, oh my God, look at those legs. And they were just shaking. And he loved it. He was just like, give me more. And I was like, whoa, man, that's a quadricep. So I remember his legs.
What about, I had to ask you about Lawrence Taylor. What about you get to New York, this fitness? I mean, could I call you a fitness coach to the stars?
Yeah, totally. I was.
Who did you work with? So people know.
Oh man, this was such a big era. This was a 10-year chapter. And again, this idea of an exercise studio was a brand new concept. It was before the super gym. And so anybody who had a high profile would go to a facility like the one that I ran in New York. And
Because
the
there
name
just
of the
weren't
studio,
there weren't that many, right? And you've got one
no,
that's
there
kind of viewed
weren't.
as high profile, so people are coming.
Yeah, and the studio I worked, the owner was from LA. Body Design by Gilda was the name of it, and people knew her through the LA world. So slowly coming through my door would be the top models and actors of the time, which included Tom Cruise, Andy McDowell, Mary Tyler Moore, who became a dear friend of mine, and we actually worked together on a
Yes,
project.
you did a
It was
fitness video with
incredible.
her, right?
I did, yeah. So we had so many high-profile people, and the biggest one for me was Madonna, because
Wow.
I had such a thing going on with her music at the same time she was in my studio. And Tom Cruise came because he was dating Rebecca De Mornay. It was mostly females, but she dragged him in when they were filming Risky Business.
Yeah, I didn't know they had a thing. Yeah, they were co-stars. Wow.
Yeah, and Helen Hunt. This is before a lot of these people really made it. Kira Sedgwick, Mary Stuart Masterson. And the craziest thing is the two women that worked for me that became super huge was Connie Britton and Annabella Sciorra. So because I was hiring a lot of actors that needed work because they weren't getting jobs, a lot of these actors would say, let me learn how to teach some fitness. And I would bring them in and give them a part-time gig. So I just am so happy for Connie Britton, seeing the work she's produced since that era. But we were a high-end celebrity hub, and they were safe there.
What's it like for you outside of this now? Because your identity is you're this, wellness coach or fitness coach to the stars, and then where's the drinking at, or the drugs? What's going on outside? Because you're in New York in the early to mid '80s, right? We're talking about that period right now. The city is bouncing back from all that crap with the bankruptcy and all that stuff, or almost going bankrupt, and now you're thriving. What is that like, and where are you in the mix of this whole thing?
Well, see, I related to what you said about the running the day after to kind of, in your own mind, equate a balance with all the drinking the night before. And so my heavy drinking began at Chapel Hill with a lot of the lacrosse players who I hung out with. There was this idea of, drink or die. And so we would just drink until we were practically all dead because we were so loaded. But I'd get up the next day and go run. So by the time I got to New York, I was so immersed in my field of work that it wasn't like I drank a lot every night, but when I did drink, I would go so far away from moderation. It would be like 3 to 4 margaritas with a shot of tequila. And my body was just a rock solid, I was like a racehorse. I could do it all. I could drink, I could work out, I could dance, I could run a business. And I was really not aware of the quantity that I could take, that I could drink most men under the table. So I was able to tolerate high alcohol and perform beautifully the next day. It never was slowing my life down at that point.
Did you have any consequences when you were in New York? Anything that you were like, whoa?
Oh, that's a great question. Not that I could actually remember right now to note, but as I've gone through making amends, anytime I have